The testing crunch is here. The White House says it plans to mail 500 million of these rapid COVID tests, but that's not going to do squat if you're trying to get yourself tested ahead of the holidays. Meanwhile, the U.S. population growing at its lowest rate since the country's founding. And are you taking the red pill or the blue pill, Baker? The Matrix is back, but is it any good? No spoilers here. Wednesday, you need to know. Let's go. Oh, good hump day, everybody. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for December 22. I am Carlo Versano here once again with a quarantining Baker Machado. Symptom check, yes. Baker?
Symptoms so far good. Everything Gucci so far. Day 5, Captain's Log, day 5 here in quarantine. I think now I am now 50% to freedom, which is very exciting, Carlo Versano. But the big deal today, of course, we'll give you guys an update tomorrow. I'm getting my COVID test today, so we'll figure out if I'm still negative at this point. But either way, halfway to freedom, which is, of course, the best news here.
You know, you don't have to be quarantining, right? I don't think, given that you're vaccinated, I don't think that the CDC needs you to, or like requires you to do the quarantine. I mean, you may still want to. Do you? I just don't want you to think that, like, you know, Fauci's going to come down and like arrest you.
Wait, you are saying I could have been free and out and about in the town as for all of these days, and I haven't done it? I've just been sitting on my couch for 5 days? My goodness.
You're just using this as an excuse to, you're using this as an excuse to just hang out and wrap your presents and.
Yes, cancel my gym membership, all of that stuff. Just really gorging myself. Carlo, I do want to talk about something we had been chatting about yesterday, and an update. We'll call it a correction, but it's more so an update because I don't think a lot of people knew about this. We were talking about the Bidens getting a new dog and also a cat that would be joining the White House soon. And we were talking about how the last cat we believed that was in the White House was Sox from the Clinton years. We were incorrect. It was actually India, which was in the George W. Bush administration. A lot of people don't remember George W. Bush had a cat named India. This cat actually had lived with the family all the way back from when Barbara and Jenna Bush were 9 years old, and the cat ended up dying at the White House when it was 18 years old. But either way, big news there that there was a cat, at least in the George W. Bush years.
Well, thank you for leading off the podcast with that very important news, Baker. Much appreciated. I did not know that, and now I do. So thank you.
Yes, indeed. And we do have a very heavy show, Carlo. So let's dive into the other big headlines that we're following for you guys today. And we got to start once again with Omicron. President Biden's pledge to distribute 500 million at-home rapid tests won't take effect until January, and the country's current testing capabilities are already buckling under the combined weight of the demand from holiday travelers and the fast-spreading Omicron variant. Now, news here, CVS and Walgreens are now limiting how many rapid tests customers can buy. That's if even, of course, you can find them right now. The lack of supply of the rapid tests, a result of limited federal investment, a sluggish regulatory process, and the lack of new raw materials out there. CVS is now saying, Carlo, their limit is 6 at-home COVID tests that you'll be able to purchase. Walgreens is saying you can only purchase 4 right now. Again, that is only if you're able to get this right now. But the New York Times, the front page today on the New York Times website right now, just basically Americans not so much worried about the Omicron variant. We're just enormously fatigued by all of the variants now.
Yeah, that's for sure. Jill actually sent me a great investigation that ProPublica did that I missed from a few weeks back, just explaining sort of why the testing failure is what it is, and it just goes back to a couple of those things you mentioned, right? The FDA has been slow moving on getting more of these tests on the market, and the Biden administration and the Trump administration just didn't put nearly enough money into the testing apparatus, really from Jump Street. I did find a great website yesterday that I'm going to link to in the newsletter today. It's called nowinstock.net, and it's it's useful for many different things, but one of the things that they have on there is they have COVID test trackers, so they'll tell you where the tests are currently in stock and where they're on pre-order and where they're out of stock around the internet, as well as how much they're going for. So I'm looking at it right now. It looks like Amazon's PCR collection kit is in stock. and Walmart has some of the antigen self-tests that are in stock, but they're pretty much out of stock everywhere else. So that's just useful, I think, to keep bookmarked. I was watching Biden yesterday. I was wondering when I was watching him how much of this sort of about face they're doing on testing just came from the brutal coverage from the media, ourselves included, from when Jen Psaki made that sarcastic remark a couple weeks ago about sending people free tests, which of course is now what they're doing.
Right.
I don't know. I don't think it was me, of course, but I don't think Jen Psaki or the White House is listening to this podcast. But I'm certainly happy to have helped if I was at least a small part of that. But like you said, the problem, of course, is that this isn't going to address the current problem. It's going to be too late to affect the real meat of this surge, which is happening right now at the worst possible time as people gather for the holidays. But look, better late than never, which is really, I think, the American motto when it comes to the pandemic.
Well, and this just gets to a larger point of. Has the pandemic been mismarketed by the administration, by health officials? I mean, the fact that President Biden's speech yesterday, the 500 million COVID tests that the government is going to be sending out, Carlo, that's not going to start until January. And then, as you have mentioned many times in this podcast, the administration has said, look, you can retroactively ask your insurance provider to cover your previous COVID test. But again, that doesn't retroactively start until January the 15th. So that's still way down the line. And again, we're only December the 22nd, and we're already averaging 154,000 COVID tests or COVID cases, new cases per day. So basically having to wait almost another month right now. I mean, we're probably already undercounting a lot of the cases that are out there right now, just because people can't get tests and either from drugstores or waiting in line at health clinics.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, the best case scenario, I think, is by the time these kits are available and they start going out in the mail, we're not going to need them because Omicron has morphed into something sort of akin to the seasonal flu, which it sure looks like it's happening if you look at the data right now. I mean, we should be seeing spikes in hospitalizations in places like New York City now, and we're just not. I saw the CEO of Northwell Health, which is one of the big hospital networks here in New York. I think he was on CNN yesterday, and he said, hey, they're fine. He said they're running at about 10% ICU capacity. As in like 10% of their ICU beds are filled. Now, that's going to be a different story once Omicron, I think, makes its way to some places where the vaccine penetration is less. But that's not a sure thing, right? I mean, this thing does appear to be pretty mild compared to past variants we've seen. Also, on that note, just one small helping of crow today. I'm actually going to eat this crow on behalf of you, Baker, because I believe it was you who said in passing, someone pointed this out yesterday, that the Florida vaccine rate was below 50%. Florida is actually at 63% fully vaccinated, which is better than the national median. So just, some apologies there if we offended any Floridians. Florida gets enough ridicule as it is. I don't want to add to the pile on.
Well, thank you for that, Carlo. I did see also this morning in the New York Times, Israel is at least planning right now to potentially start a fourth booster shot for individuals over the age of 60. It did say the CDC is right now at least looking at the possibility of those who are immunocompromised of at least potentially getting that fourth booster shot here in the United States as well. But that's now something to look at, given the fact that we have mimicked a lot of the research that has been coming out of Israel. So if Israel's already sort of starting the next booster shot storyline, likely that's going to be a talking point we'll see here in the United States as well.
Yeah, I mean, we can't even get people to do their third shot. So I don't know who thinks that they're going to get 4 shots in arms. But
meanwhile, the pandemic helped send the U.S. population growth, Carlo, to its lowest rate on record. The country's population grew by just 0.1% between July 2020 and July of this year. That, according to the census. It's the first time that the nation's population grew by less than 1 million people since 1937. And don't forget, Carlo, last year, COVID basically brought down the mortality rate in this country as well by almost 2 full years. 1.8 years is how much the average American life expectancy had dropped over the course of 2020. Right now, life expectancy is about 77 years in this country, down from 78.8, which it was in 2019.
Yeah, this is one of these big, big stories that we don't really understand, I think, quite yet. There's a lot of things happening here. One of the things from the data I found fascinating: net arrivals, which means basically people coming into the United States from abroad, eclipsed the birth surplus, and the birth surplus means how many more people were born than people who died, right? For the first time ever, that number flip-flopped. So population growth has been slowing for years. It started before COVID, but the pandemic really accelerated this trend. Really, I think more than just about anybody expected. And again, there's a lot of reasons for this that I think social scientists are trying to figure out what's happening. But it's happening across demographics. Here's a statistic that blew my mind. The Mormon fertility rate is now barely above replacement. The Mormons. If the Mormons aren't reproducing, we are kind of screwed, right? I mean, like literally. But if only there were millions of hardworking people literally risking their lives to become Americans, we could probably at least attempt to solve this problem. Oh wait, there are, and our immigration system is so completely messed up that we can't figure out how to get them in here in a legal way.
I want to get to this next story out of my home state in Colorado because it is such a heartbreaking and complex story here. More than 4.5 million people have signed a petition now urging clemency, Carlo, for a truck driver who was sentenced to 110 years in prison for causing a deadly crash outside of Denver back in 2019. Raquel Aguilera Maderos was driving his semi-truck on I-70 above the speed limit, about 85 miles per hour, is I think what the reports were, when his brakes failed on his truck, and that led him to slam into traffic, causing a 28-car pileup, and that ended up killing 4 people. Now, he was not under the influence whatsoever, but a jury convicted him of the vehicular homicide. And then the conviction triggered Colorado's mandatory minimum laws, even though the judge said he would have given the man a lighter sentence if he could. Even one of the jurors in an interview was holding back tears, saying that the 110-year sentence was not justified in this case because he, again, not under the influence, had no prior criminal history. But the prosecutors have basically said that there were off-ramps potentially that he should have been able to take his truck off the side of the road and basically try to get out of this. Now, clemency is one particular issue that is up for grabs by the governor. The governor's office, though, saying that clemency paperwork has not been filed by this individual. But the man had basically said in the courtroom that basically he's not a murderer. He is a nice person, and that he would have asked God to take his life instead of those who lost their lives in this car accident. But either way, just a sad, heartbreaking story here, Carlo.
All around, really. Truck drivers have been actually refusing to drive through Colorado in protest. The truck driving industry sort of creating a kind of like Rocky Mountain blockade, you might call it. And the Denver Post, I don't know if you saw this, they wrote an editorial last week urging Governor Polis to do something about this and to take on these mandatory minimum laws, which are another one of these vestiges of the tough on crime playbook sort of from the 1990s, even though they're often unfair and arbitrary, as this case illustrates. But, look, obviously, I think there should be accountability if 4 people die in a car accident. But it seems like to me that the truck company should be held accountable, not this poor guy who, even if he was driving over the speed limit, it doesn't seem he certainly wasn't I don't think he was really being reckless. I mean, he even said he was trying to get on one of those off ramps, and there was another truck blocking the way. And that truck company, by the way, has a record of safety mishaps. But this goes back to something that we've been talking about on the podcast for a while, which is kind of like the what's happening in criminal justice reform right now. And the problem with mandatory minimum laws, it's the same problem with things like solitary confinement and with excessive bail. In my opinion, it's that these are instruments that prosecutors use to bully defendants into taking a plea deal because it makes the defendants either afraid of or unable to afford the time it takes to go to trial. It's just this heavy-handed mechanism of the state's power against its citizens, and that's supposed to be the basis of the criminal justice reform movement. Now, somewhere along the line, the left, the progressives, sort of like transmogrified that into just not prosecuting violent criminals. I don't know how that happened, but it's completely idiotic, and it probably sent the whole reform movement back like a decade, because most people, I think, reacted to that by being like, "So you're just saying that we should just let violent criminals out onto the streets?" It's like, no, that's not what we're saying at all. But what we're saying is there needs to be, we have to get rid of some of these like sort of heavy-handed approaches that are just like one size fits all, right?
No, I think you bring up a lot of interesting points. And one thing that gives me just a little bit of a sliver of hope here is out of all of the sort of polarizing partisan topics that are out there, weirdly interesting, criminal justice reform is one area that you've actually seen Republicans and Democrats actually come really to the table on. I mean, President Trump famously met with Van Jones and Kim Kardashian. He wanted criminal justice reform to be a big part of his administration, and a lot of that has basically also trickled back to the Biden administration as well. So it has actually made some strange bedfellows on this particular topic. In this one in particular, the judge has basically said he was just doing what the law is basically requiring him to do in this particular case with this truck driver. But it does seem like if the paperwork is at least filed, the governor, Jared Polis, who is very popular in the state of Colorado, at least would take a look at it, which I think is at least movement from where we had been in the past, where a lot of times something like this would have happened. And I think the politics would have basically forced governors to look the other way on something like this. Let's talk about
4.6 million signatures on that petition. I mean, that's unheard of. I don't think you've ever seen that's going to cause him to at least take a look. Yeah.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, big news in the labor world here, Carlo. The 11-week strike at Kellogg's is now over. That after workers approved a multi-year contract with the cereal maker. The union says the deal didn't include any concessions, and employees will be granted across-the-board wage increases, cost of living adjustments, and even better benefits now as a result. Kellogg's has been threatening to permanently replace the 1,400 striking plant workers in Michigan, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee that before both parties returned to the bargaining table to hammer out the contract. I mean, Carlo, we talk so often, at least on Wake Up with Cheddar, about the labor market, but it is incredible, what's been going on with Deere, what's now been going on with Amazon, what's now happening here in New York with Starbucks. Basically, this environment is the best sort of employee environment right now for workers to basically renegotiate their rights when it comes to the things that they're working on in terms of the work environment right now.
All the more reason why it's amazing to me that the Democrats aren't making a bigger deal about this. Not all of them, though. I don't know if you saw this. Bernie Sanders was out there on the Kellogg picket line last weekend talking to striking workers and their families. Say what you will about Bernie Sanders, but the guy talks the talk unlike any other politician in America, maybe ever for that matter. It's really something. I just remain flummoxed that the Democrats haven't latched on to what's happening in organized labor as a way to try and get back some of these working class voters that they lost to Donald Trump. It just seems so obvious to me. And I know that everyone says like, oh, Joe Biden is like the, a friend to organized labor. He's like the strongest union president we've had.
Yeah.
But I sure haven't seen him out on any picket lines.
He hasn't. No, that's a very good point. And remember when Amazon was trying, workers in the Bessemer, Alabama plant were trying to unionize before the failed vote happened. Biden did come out and support those union workers, which again, unprecedented for a sitting president to do that. But we should note the union vote ended up failing, and we haven't really heard from the president about union workers really since then. But this, as you mentioned, has really sort of opened up the door for Republicans here. Marco Rubio has famously come out saying that the Republican Party needs to be the party now of the working class, the labor unions, all basically those sort of disenfranchised Democratic voters over the course of the last few decades that were definitely appealing to somebody like former President Trump back in 2020.
My grandfather would be rolling in his grave if he saw the Republican Party trying to take on the mantle of organized labor. And if they're able to pull that off, the Democrats deserve to lose, because that's just embarrassing.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, and the same with my grandparents who are also union members as well. Yeah. The long-awaited fourth installment, Carlo, of the Matrix franchise dropped on HBO Max overnight. The Matrix Resurrections still sitting at a respectable but nothing special 71% on Rotten Tomatoes. critics are kind of split right now over its added value to the original 1999 blockbuster. Now, Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss reprised their iconic roles as Neo and Trinity in the film. As I mentioned, reviews okay. I think I saw Brian Laurie of CNN say you could take the red pill or the blue pill, but in this one, I'm taking the sleeping pill, which is why I had joked about that at the top of the show. But some other people are saying, look, it brings back the nostalgia, which is really what you want. And what I find to be most intriguing here is this is one of the last few movies that HBO Max is putting on the streamer that they had basically said at the early onset part of the pandemic that they would put their films on the streamer before they would start going back to theatrical releases next year. If anything, maybe this is the best news for HBO Max, given the fact that Omicron cases are running rampant right now. And, people like me who are stuck at home for the holidays just need something to watch right now.
Well, it's interesting, right? I mean, this is the last of the 2021 Warner Brothers slate that is, to your point, getting a simultaneous streaming and theatrical release known as day and date. The studio reverting back to an exclusively theatrical release plan next year, really, I think, acknowledging that the day and date experiment kind of failed. It just wasn't. I mean, it wasn't a failure, I think, in terms of consumers, right? In terms of viewers, people like being able to watch these big movies at home, but it just wasn't good for the studio system, and it wasn't good for the theater industry. The studios made a lot of enemies, particularly Warner Brothers, in the theater industry by doing this year. And this time last year, I thought day and date was really going to be the future, but I think that it's pretty clear it's just not the future that the studio system wants. These movies just don't make enough money at the box office if they're available to stream from your couch. I would have actually seen this if I could go to the movies. I would, and didn't have an infant daughter. I would go see this in the movies.
You want the special effects.
I was sort of excited for it.
And all the things that you get in the
movie.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I'll be disappointed, as I've been at every turn with the latest, batch of sequels and reboots. But do you remember, actually, because you're of the same sort of vintage as me, do you remember seeing the original Matrix in the theaters when it came out, we were in high school?
I saw that and the second one in theaters, and it was amazing. It was so great. It was so groundbreaking at the time.
It was. And those were the days when, like, I don't know about you, but I would go to the movies with my buddy Gen, and we would go to the movies. We wouldn't even know what we were going to see. We were just like, we decided to see The Matrix because, like, the poster looked cool. We didn't know anything about it, right? I feel like kids growing up these days, they don't really have that experience anymore. And it's such an amazing experience to just see a movie like that you have no idea what's coming, and you're just sort of like blown away in your seat.
When I was a freshman in college, I worked at a movie theater, and that's what I would do. When I was not working on the clock, I would go and walk into different theaters and watch different films. It was sort of like the best perk at the time. Because, by the way, at the time, I think it was making like $7 an hour. So it was like the only perk I was really getting was all these free movies. If anything, maybe what we've learned, and this is going to be interesting this weekend, because of Omicron, how does Spider-Man do week 2 now in theaters, given the fact that everybody who maybe wanted to see Spider-Man has already seen it? So does it have staying power? That will be a big question this weekend. But if anything, to your earlier point about streaming movies, we've learned that I think adult dramas are now basically going to always be on streamers. Last night, I watched the new Being the Ricardos on Amazon. The I Love
How was that?
With it's good. It's good. She's great. I'm not really sold on Javier Bardem as Desi Arnaz. It's an Aaron Sorkin film, so you're exasperated by the amount of dialogue that's in it.
Right.
But it's not bad. She's really, really good, and you learn a lot about Lucy in the process. My point, I guess, is what I'm trying to say is I think traditionally that would have been a theatrical release that maybe would have garnered $10 to $20 million at the box office.
Yeah.
But Ben Affleck brought up a really big point last week, which is when you have these companies like Amazon or Disney, which have massive marketing tools at their disposal, they actually can get better penetration on a movie like these adult dramas on their streamers than they ever would have had them in the theaters, because you can micro-target to the people wherever on Amazon that they're watching to get them to watch these particular movies much better than they ever would have been like to be like, all right, I'll spend $20 or $30 and go see it in the theater.
Right. Well, plus a company like Amazon doesn't actually care how Being the Ricardos does. It just cares if it keeps people subscribed to Amazon Prime, right? That's sort of the problem. I think that this is sort of decoupled, the art from the artistry. Anyway, we're going.
No, hold on. And one last note, I'm just going to say on this, and I want to say this about Netflix too. I think they spend a ton of money for it to win an Oscar, so that way they can continue to say to people, we have the best films ever. and that's because we've won all these awards on
Yeah.
it. But yes,
That's a good point. Okay, more to know before we go, Baker. Kick us off.
A jury in Boston found a Harvard professor guilty of lying to the feds about his ties to China. Charles Lieber, a world-renowned nanoscientist who chaired Harvard's chemistry department, found guilty on all charges related to payments that he took from the Chinese government for a talent program. The case was closely watched as a test of the Justice Department's crackdown on Beijing's attempts to infiltrate American universities that in order to gain scientific expertise here. Carlo, big news here.
Yeah, keeping an eye on what's going on over in Russia. Putin really upping the rhetoric against Ukraine, saying Russia has, quote, no room to retreat in its standoff with the United States over the Russian military presence on the Ukraine border. Putin's his defense minister also claiming that the United States was deploying mercenaries to carry out some sort of chemical attack in Ukraine to provoke Russia. Obviously, we're not doing that, but this is the Russian playbook. They blame us for something that they're about to do. So be prepared. We are probably almost certainly going to see an all-out invasion of Ukraine within the next couple of months. It may get ugly this winter.
Meanwhile, back in Washington, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell extending an open hand to Senator Joe Manchin, saying that the Democrat from West Virginia is welcome to cross the aisle and caucus with the Republicans. Now, Manchin had refused that wooing for years, but he's become person non grata to a lot of Democrats that since he sank the Build Back Better bill. Now, Manchin in the past, we should note, has said he has no plans on switching parties. If he does switch parties, a lot of political analysts suggest he might drop the Democratic label and become an independent, but still caucus with Democrats. Mm-hmm. We have to also note that Joe Manchin up for re-election again in 2024, potentially likely when Donald Trump is on the ballot in a state like West Virginia that Trump won over 30% of the vote. So Manchin obviously thinking of his political calculus here. And one last thing I'll note, the New York Times reporting yesterday, McConnell's number 2, John Thune from South Dakota, mulling a potential retirement this year.
John Thune, the handsomest guy in the Senate, right?
Yes.
That guy he's a good-looking guy.
Remember, by the way, when one of the biggest political upsets ever was when he knocked out Tom Daschle, who was the majority leader at the time in that South Dakota election.
Okay, a little update here. New York City making contingency plans to scale back the Times Square New Year's Eve ball drop because of what else? Omicron. Our mayor, Bill de Blasio, saying a decision will be made before Christmas whether to cancel the celebration altogether, even though you already have to be fully vaccinated to get into Times Square for the ball drop, and it's outside. So why you would cancel this, I have no idea, even though it's, of course, the world's worst experience, but it's still it's still something people like to do. I don't know why we can't do it. I don't know. I'm just like so done.
I mean, look, last year's New Year's was so weird where you had nobody there. I think even if we hate it, especially New Yorkers, no New Yorkers love the Times Square festivities. But it was sort of weird having nobody there last year. So I think just in terms of the visuals of normalcy, I think we want to see people at Times Square for New Year's.
Exactly. All right, guys, that's what you need to know for Wednesday, December 22nd. Hang tough. Be safe. We'll see you tomorrow.